Set. Good evening and welcome to Prairie Lights. I'm Kathleen Johnson with Prairie Lights, and tonight I am pleased to welcome Iowa Writers Workshop graduate Cristina Henríquez back to Iowa City to read to us and talk about her novel, The Book of Unknown Americans. Ben Fountain calls The Book of Unknown Americans a triumph of storytelling. Henríquez pulls us into the lives of her characters with such mastery that we hang on to them just as fiercely as they hang on to one another and their dreams. This passionate, powerful novel will stay with you long after you've turned the final page. Cristina Henríquez is the author of the novel The World in Half and the short story collection Come Together, Fall Apart, which was a New York Times Editor's Choice selection. Her stories have appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, American Scholar, Glimmer Train, Plowshares, Tri-Quarterly, Agni, and the Virginia Quarterly Review, where she was named one of fiction's new luminaries. She's also the recipient of an Alfredo Cisneros del Moral Foundation Award. And because Henríquez is a visiting author for our reading series, we're featuring The Book of Unknown Americans at 25% off. So if you like what you hear tonight or know someone else who would, she'll be very happy to sign a copy and personalize it for you tonight. We're so happy to have her here tonight. So please help me welcome Cristina Henríquez.
You guys, this is so crazy for me. I mean, just over 10 years ago, I was sitting in this audience watching other writers and listening to them and hoping that one day I would get to be up here. So this is really, really amazing for me, and I'm so thrilled that you all are here. Thank you for coming out tonight. This is my third book. It came out in June. It's called The Book of Unknown Americans. And despite the fact that it's been out since June, I have yet to figure out a concise, succinct way of saying what it's about somehow. The easiest thing to say is that it's about a group of immigrants who all live in one apartment building in Delaware, because I know everyone was waiting for the great Delaware novel. The other part of it is that it's about two parents, Alma and Arturo Rivera, whose daughter, Maribel, suffers a brain injury in Mexico where they live. And in order to make her well again, they come to the United States and bring her to a certain school in Delaware where they hope that she'll get the attention and the care that she needs. And when they move into that apartment building, they meet all of their neighbors, including one named Mayor Toro, who's a 16-year-old boy who falls in love with Maribel. And because it's sort of this like teenage infatuation, he will do basically anything he can to is that better? He'll do anything he can for Maribel, and that sort of leads to some unintended consequences for a lot of the characters in the book, without giving too much away. So I'm going to read two sections from the book. The way it's structured is that there's these two narrators, Alma and Mayor, and the point of view goes back and forth between the two of them over the course of the book. But then there's also all these other narrators who are the neighbors in the building, and they're interspersed all throughout. So I'm going to read one of the neighbor voices, and I'm also going to read a section from Mayor's point of view where he and his family go and buy a car. And both of these are sections I've not read ever before, but I thought in the spirit of workshop and bringing new things to the table that I would try out something new with you guys tonight. So, and then I hope we can have lots of questions and discussion, because that's always my favorite part of readings. So this is Mayor. Not long after New Year's, my tia Gloria called my mom to say that her divorce had gone through. Esteban is no longer part of my life, she said. My mom burst into tears. "Why are you crying?" my aunt asked. "It's good news, and listen to this. He has to pay me." "What do you mean?" my mom asked, sniffling. "I'm getting $80,000 from the settlement." My mom's tears dried up immediately. "And," my mom told us over dinner that night, "she's giving some of it to us." She was pink in the face, barely able to contain herself. My dad wiped his mouth with a napkin. "How much is she giving us? $50? "Well, that was nasty," my mom said. "You're going to feel bad when I tell you the real number." I peeked at my dad, who was waiting with the napkin clutched in his hand. My mom started eating again, delicately picking the capers off the rice with the tines of her fork. She took at least 4 bites before my dad finally said, "Well, don't keep it a secret." A grin played on my mom's lips. "Never mind then," my dad said. "You don't want to know?" "Why would she be giving us money anyway?" he said. "Because we need it." "Who needs it? Not us. We're fine." "We're fine," my mom said. "Now we're fine? For months you've been talking about how you might lose your job, but now you're telling me we're fine?" Unbelievable. My dad shoveled rice into his mouth, probably to stop himself from saying anything else, but my mom couldn't let it go. "I'm only saying, Rafa, that we could use the money." My dad dropped his fork onto the plate. "Jesus, Celia, I told you we don't need it. What's she giving us, $100, $200? We don't need it." "If you don't want to take it, you don't have to. I'll just keep it for myself then." "What is that supposed to mean?" "What I said." "You want to leave?" "Who said anything about leaving?" "You take this, I take that. Is that what you're doing, just like Gloria?" My mom rolled her eyes. But my dad was in a groove. He lifted his plate from the table and slammed it down, scattering rice and capers and peppers and chicken across the floor. "God damn it, Celia. How many times do I have to tell you that I will take care of this family? What do you think I'm doing out there every day? You think I'm working my ass off for fun?" He stood, toppling this chair. My mom pursed her lips and stared at her plate. He reached across the table and seized both of her wrists. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." But as soon as she did, my dad threw her wrists back at her in disgust. "I don't know how many times," he muttered, shaking his head. Then he turned, using his leg to sweep aside the chair, which was on its back on the floor, stepped over the food, and walked out of the kitchen. The clock on the wall ticked faintly. The glass bottles of vinegar and hot sauce that my mom kept on the shelves inside the refrigerator door rattled. I felt embarrassed for my mom, who sat across from me screwing up her face like she was determined not to cry, but I stayed absolutely silent, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, my mom said quietly, "Mayor, finish your chicken." 2 days later, my dad and I learned the news. Tia Gloria was giving us $10,000. After the heat between my parents died down, my mom blurted out the number during dinner. My dad nearly choked on his food. "I can't believe it," my mom kept saying. "Well, we've probably given her almost as much money over the years," my dad said once he'd recovered from the shock. $10,000, Rafa, come on." "We did what we could," my dad said. "Of course we did. And now she's doing the same. It's just that she can afford to do more. $10,000, I can't believe it." It didn't take my dad quite as long to wrap his head around the idea. The morning the money landed in my parents' bank account, my dad said, "I think we should buy a car." "A what?" my mom said. "Nothing fancy," my dad said. "I'm not talking about an Alfa Romeo here, but a car, something that runs." He was happy, I could tell, at the mere thought. "A car?" my mom asked, dumbfounded. "Yes, you've heard of it? 4 wheels, takes gasoline." It was no secret that since he was a boy, my dad had lusted after cars, and the pinnacle of his obsession would have been to own one. Once he bought an issue of Auto Week at the Newark newsstand, and for the past few years he'd consoled himself by flipping through it while he lay on the couch, licking his thumb before he turned each thin, glossy page, staring for what seemed like hours at a sleek black Maserati or a balloonish blue Bugatti. Enrique and I used to make fun of him about it, but even when the pages eventually started falling out, my dad just taped them together and flipped through it again. "But what will we do with a car?" my mom asked. She looked at my dad now with mild amusement, as if he had just suggested they buy an elephant. "What do you think?" my dad said. "We'll drive it." "Where?" "Anywhere. You could drive to the Pathmark." "I don't know how to drive." "You'll learn." "Can I drive it?" I asked. "You don't have a license yet," my dad said. "But when I get one, I mean." "Rafa, be serious," my mom went on. "We don't need a car. We could go to Panama 10 times with that money." My dad rubbed his chin. He looked at the two of us, sitting there, eating breakfast. I could tell, and I'm sure my mom could too, that he had made up his mind. "We're getting a car," he said. So then they go and they buy the car, and this is their drive home. My dad didn't stall once on the drive home. Of course, he never made it above 30 miles per hour either, even when we got on the stretch of Route 141 between I-95 and Kirkwood Highway. He crept cautiously onto 141, like a beetle onto the tip of a branch, and kept a steady pace, even though all the other cars in existence were flying past us at warp speed, honking as they swerved by. "What are you doing?" my mom asked, buckled into her seatbelt in the front. My dad, focused on the road ahead, said nothing. "Everyone's passing us," she said. "Let them," he said, gripping the steering wheel with both hands now that we were in gear. "No, this is not good, Rafa. You have to keep up." "The speed limit is 50, I said, trying to be helpful. My mom peered at the speedometer. "You're only going 25. Again, my dad said nothing. He offered no explanation, no defense. He just focused on the road ahead and on steering the car. A semi roared by, sounding a long honk as it did. From on high, the driver gave us the finger. "I can't look," my mom said, putting her hand over her eyes. "This is awful." "Give it gas," I said, affecting the voice of Mr. Mason. "Both of you," my dad said. "I know what I'm doing." "I hope we don't see anyone we know," my mom said. "We're on the highway, Celia, not at a party." "This is so embarrassing." "No one we know even has a car," my dad said. "We're not going to have one for much longer either if you don't go faster." "I know what I'm doing." "It's dangerous, Rafa. Everyone has to go around us." I had been glancing out the back window every now and then, watching people switch lanes and flash their headlights at us. At that moment, I saw a car that had been coming up behind us in our lane swerve out to the side just before it reached us. The driver hadn't realized until too late how slow we were going, or else he had miscalculated how fast he would catch up to us. He skidded onto the shoulder as my dad, totally unaware, kept moving us forward. The driver righted the car, put on his turn signal, and shot back into the traffic at the first opening. He careened around us and, as he passed by, yelled out his open window, "Learn how to fucking drive!" My mom slumped in her seat. "Ay, Dios." "We're almost there," my dad said. "Where?" my mom asked. "The exit." And when we pulled off 2.5 miles later, my dad expertly brought the gears down to first, to idle at a red light. My mom sat up. "You don't understand," my dad said. "They stop you." "Who? What are you talking about?" my mom asked. "That's why I was being cautious." "Who stops you, Rafa?" "The police. If you're white, or maybe Oriental, they let you drive however you want. But if you're not, they stop you." "Who told you that?" "The guys at the diner. That's what they say. If you're black or if you're brown, they automatically think you've done something wrong." "Rafa, that's ridiculous. We've lived here for 15 years. We're citizens." "The police don't know that by looking at us. They see a brown face through the windshield and boom, sirens." My mom shook her head. "That's what that was about? I didn't want to give them a reason to stop me." "You were driving like a blind man, Rafa. That will give them a reason to stop you." "Everybody else just has to obey the law. We have to obey it twice as well." "But that doesn't mean you have to go twice as slow as everybody else." The light turned green and my dad brought the car out of first. We cruised under the overpass, a shadow draping over the car like a blanket. Next time, just try to blend in with everyone else and you'll be fine, my mom offered. The way of the world, my dad said. What? My mom asked as we emerged into the sunlight. Just trying to blend in, that's the way of the world. Well, that's the way of America, at least, my mom said. So that was one section. And then I thought I would read there's a certain neighbor voice that I usually read, but I'm going to try this other one instead tonight. And this guy's name is Quinto. My name is Quinto. I came from Nicaragua, baby, the land of lakes and volcanoes. Been here almost 8 years to the day. Back in Nicaragua, I was studying to be in the priesthood. I thought I heard God calling my name from up in the clouds somewhere, man, and I thought he was telling me I was the chosen one. This deep, booming voice. I wasn't even high. Drugs hadn't even come into my life yet. But I think I might have been hallucinating or something, because I've had conversations with God since then, and he's like, nope, don't know what you're talking about, Benny. Never said all that about you being the one. Sorry to disappoint. A few buddies of mine left Nicaragua to come make some real bones over here. Wasn't no money for pinoleros back like us back at home. I left when I was 20. Told a dude I would pay him $2,000 to bring me over, $300 up front. Took me a while to scrape it together. $300? In Nicaragua, you can live off that for a while. I'm ashamed to admit it, but I stole some of it from the church. Stuffed the offering envelopes up under my shirt one week when I was supposed to be doing my Eucharistic minister duties and walked right out with it. I got shunted into this house in Arizona until I could pay the rest. That house in Arizona, man, that place was intense. I didn't see the sun for like weeks. And Arizona is one of those places that might as well be on the sun. That's how sunny it is, so it's nuts that we never saw it. The blinds were shut and there were heavy bedspreads all over the windows. And me and the 12 other guys with me, we were like cockroaches, crawling over each other at all hours of the day. There was no room to move. Just sit tight, keep the faith. I don't even know why we had to pay so much money. I mean, it wasn't no Ritz-Carlton. Wasn't even no Ritz Cracker Box. But that's the thing, it's just extortion, top to bottom. I wanted to get the hell out of there, so I called an uncle I used to be close with. I mean, he used to come to my birthday parties when I was a kid, and he would take me to the beach sometimes and let me play in the water while he smoked and hit on girls. But anyway, he didn't have the funds. I didn't even bother to ask my mom and pop. Those two never had nothing. You know how the gringos say it? No dinero, muchacho. If that weren't the truth, I never would have left Nicaragua to begin with. One of the guys in the house started dealing for the smugglers. He earned out his fee in 2 weeks. I didn't know how else I was going to get out of there, so I signed up too. Figured I'd burn through it, you know, just get it done until I had enough to leave. Then I'd be on to bigger and better things. Problem is, you get a taste for that kind of money and it's hard to go back to anything else. I was out on the streets in Phoenix. We had certain places we always hit up. White kids who wanted to score, came with their parents' money rolled up in their fists, acting all sly as they handed it over, thinking they were so street. But the truth was you could name your price with those kids, and whatever you told them, they would pay. They didn't know any better, most of them. There were some real junkies who came by, too. Some pretty hard dudes. I got tangled up with a few of them once, just a stupid fight. And the next thing I knew, I woke up one morning, busted out of my mind, bleeding out my side. I'd been stabbed, and I didn't even know it. That's when I decided it had to end. I hitched a ride out of Arizona with a guy who was driving to Baltimore. The drug scene there was wicked, 10 times worse than in Arizona. I was trying so hard to be on the straight and narrow. I was talking to God about it all the time. I was like, where's your deep voice now, God, when I really need help? And then I swear I heard it. He told me to split. To where? I asked him. Funny thing about God, though. He doesn't always give you the answers. Not right when you ask for them, anyway. Because I didn't hear nothing. But I knew I gotta leave. So I went down to the Greyhound station and said, here's how much money I have. Give me a ticket. And the bus brought me to Delaware. It's not paradise, but at least here I can be at peace. It was never like that for me in Nicaragua. And not at my first few stops here, neither. I flip burgers now at the King. Used to be at Wendy's, but they gave me, oh man, the worst shifts, so I switched it up. Person needs regular sleep, you know. I ain't getting any younger. But I feel settled here. I took a couple of nasty turns, but I ended up all right. Thank you.
Cristina Henríquez would be happy to take questions. If you want to have a question, if you would just please raise your hand. I was sort of wondering, with a novel of what sort of things before the book was published worried you about publishing a novel about the immigrant experience?
I was worried that people would ask me to talk about immigration. That somehow they would look to me to be some kind of expert on immigration, when really what I wanted to talk about was the human stories behind immigration. I mean, I have my own, you know, thoughts about immigration as a system, as a political, you know, being, but what was most interesting to me in terms of fiction was just the stories, the ordinary stories that people don't necessarily hear, that are hopefully, you know, they're unpolitical in the sense that they're all of us. So
I just want to know how you personally relate to the characters in your book.
Now that they exist, now that I've written them, I mean, that's an interesting question. They're completely invented. I'll start by saying that. Like, no one I ever write is based fully on anybody I know in real life. The book was inspired by my dad, who came to the United States from Panama in 1971. And he came to study chemical engineering in Delaware. And he thought that he would get his degree and go back. And he ended up staying. And I just thought, you know, he's been here for more than 40 years. Like, he's 3 kids. Like, he's done all these things, you know, had this job at the same company forever. He's a vice president now, whatever. But it's not like the kind of spectacular story that ends up in the newspaper or something like that. But it's the kind of story that I'm interested in. It's the kind of story that makes me tick. So I wanted to write stories like his. So I have this soft spot for all the characters, because I feel like, in a way, they're all offshoots of my dad. Like, they have nothing to do with him, but, you know, they were born because of him and because of my connection to him. But, you know, I have an affinity for certain ones more than others. I love Mayor for some reason. I just think he's such a sweet kid who's trying to do the right things. Yeah, and there's certain other neighbors who I really always love, but I don't know.
I understand you write both fiction and nonfiction.
I mean, sort of. I write nonfiction when I have to, yes.
So I guess the question was going to be, does one come more easily to you than the other?
Fiction, yeah. I mean, when I'm writing nonfiction, well, for a long time, I've gotten better at it now, but for a long time I had this problem where I would have the inclination to make things up, you know, which will get you into trouble very quickly when you're writing nonfiction, when, you know, the fact checker at the magazine calls and, did this really happen? And you're like, well, you know. But I want things to, like, fit together and work in a way that you can't manipulate. I mean, life is not like that, you know, and fiction isn't exactly like that, but fiction still needs to have the artifice that makes you feel like that, you know. Even when you have, like, a totally unresolved story, there's some kind of, like, echoes throughout the story that makes it feel full, you know, that makes it feel round. That's how I think of it in my head, as like some kind of sphere almost. And I like that. I like that feel of, I don't know, how it can all come together, I guess. So fiction for sure, yeah.
What was your inspiration for the character of Maribel? Like, with the brain damage, and was that related to your father?
That actually was because, well, no, that's because my mother is a translator at the school district in Delaware, and she works with special needs families. So there are families who have kids who need to go through the special needs program, and they don't speak English. And I was thinking just a lot about, you know, when something has happened to your child, the lengths that you will go to to make them well or to give them the life that you hoped, you know, that they would have or you envisioned for them. And so I think that's how Maribel came into being. I was just thinking a lot about those kind of families and those situations. Yeah.
It was interesting, the story you told about your dad was like a really classic success story kind of thing. And I was wondering, because it doesn't sound like that's the same thing going on for your character Mayor's family. So I was wondering about their relationship, I guess, to the American dream and whether that is actually like linked to your father's experience.
No, I don't think so, not necessarily. And part of what I wanted to do in the book was give a full range of experiences. So there's some characters, like there's a character, Nelia Zafon, who comes because she wants to make it on Broadway, and she never does make it on Broadway, but she starts her own theater company, you know. And so to me, she's living the American dream. Like, she's an entrepreneur, she has this business, she came here, you know, did all these things. So there's people like that, and then there's people like Mayor's family. Although I would say in some ways, I think Mayor's parents feel that they did the right thing by coming to the United States. I think Mayor's dad, Rafa, feels that even in Panama, he never would have made anything of himself. Like, you know, he wouldn't have become much anyway. And so here he's like a line cook at a diner, and that's his job. But there's a range of people who've made it, you know, had success to varying degrees throughout the book. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Sure.
You said the book was published in June, so can you go back and from June and all the way back to when did you first start formulating your ideas about the story and the book, and go back from June to, so
Right.
kind of march through that. And second question is, I enjoyed this book so much that I am really anxious to know if you can share with us what we might see next.
Well, I'll start with the first one, which is this book started as a short story, and it took me 5 years to write. So it's June, and then go back 5 years if you want to get to the beginning. And the original, for me, it always comes from language, right? So I don't like sit down and say, I want to write a story about X, Y, and Z, and then I take off and start writing it. And actually, to think about it that way for me is very detrimental. Instead, I just think of a sentence and I keep rolling it out. And after you have a draft, then you figure out, oh, what was it kind of about? And you try to bring all of that up to the surface as much as you can. So the line it started with, which is still the first line of Mayor's first chapter, is we heard they were from Mexico. And that's it. That's all I had. We heard they were from Mexico. But it invites, naturally, certain questions that you have to answer through the prose, right? Who are the we? Who is the they? Were they really from Mexico? If not, were they from? You know, it's like, so you push it out from there. And that's how it just built. And it was a story just about Mayor and Maribel and their relationship. And I just couldn't let it go, and I kept thinking there was more there. And so the way that I expanded it, though, is like I just stretched it all out and then added more stuff in between. So the beginning of that story and the end of that story are almost the beginning and the end of the book now. And, you know, they're very close at least. And then I just filled it in with a bunch of everything in between. So to answer your second question, though, I'm not totally sure. I wish I knew. Trust me, I really wish I knew what I was working on next. Although I wrote a story not long ago, and I thought it was a story, and I sent it to a bunch of friends, and everybody had the same feedback, which is, this is something bigger. And I was like, oh, did I do it again? You know, like, really, I thought I was done. I thought I'd just written a standalone story and I was done, but I think it might be the beginning of another book, and I've got to figure out now how to spin it out into something bigger. But it's interesting, that one, though. I was feeling particularly stuck for a while after finishing the edits on this book, and, you know, I've been reading so much good stuff, which is great in one way, but is also intensely envy-producing for a writer. You know, and you read the stuff and you're like, I'm never going to write something that good, or like there was this book, Prayers for the Stolen, that came out earlier this year by Jennifer Clement, and they have a copy downstairs. So whoever runs and gets it first should get a prize. The prize is the book. It's so amazing. I read it, and I was like, this is the book I wanted to write. But that's a hard position to be. Like, it's hard to read all the great stuff and then feel even more paralyzed in some ways. So what I did was I went back. I have a kind of intricate filing system in my computer, and I went back and looked at stories that I had written in college before I knew anything, before I knew what I was trying to do, or before I knew anything about craft or how to write. It was just like me just putting stuff on the page to see what I could do and just playing around with language. And I was going through those files and reading them, and there was one that I was like, this is sort of interesting, actually, and then I just wrote a story out of that, and I feel like there's something really authentic and raw about it that I'm really excited about. So I'm going to follow that and see what happens. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned in the Prayers for the Stolen that it had something in it that was the book that you wanted to write. What do you think is important in a book, or what is it that you value? You can say about that book, or just in general.
Right.
What really resonates with you?
I think lately the thing that resonates with me so much is language. I almost could care less what the plot is. If it's really well written, I will let a writer take me anywhere. And I felt that very strongly about Prayers for the Stolen. I mean, it has a plot. The plot to me was secondary. I mean, she's a poet by training, the author, Jennifer Clement. And you can tell on every page of that book that she's a poet. And it's just so beautifully told that I just felt like, and the voice is just so present and so consistent throughout. I thought it was a fantastic book that somehow didn't get a lot of attention, but I think, should have.
Yeah, since you were making reference to people whose books you wish you had written. What are your, I guess, however you want to phrase it, your favorite writers, your influences? Are there any writers from any time that are sort of your touchstones?
Right. The one that comes to mind is Junot Díaz and Drown, but Drown in particular, more so than his later books. I always go back to it. Someone who was very formative for me was Sandra Cisneros, too. And actually, I read her for the first time when I was here at Workshop, and I just discovered her in an anthology, just on my own reading time. And that reading her and reading excerpts from House on Mango Street opened up a world of possibilities for me. And what I was allowed to write about, because it took me a long time to determine that I could write about Panama, which was a place that I was not born and had never lived. You have this question, am I writing my dad's story? Am I writing my own story? So it took me a long time to come to the decision that I could write about that, and she helped me figure that out, I think, reading her. Lately, this year I read Department of Speculation by Jenny Awful, there's also 2 copies of that downstairs, which I thought was fantastic. And again, like a very language-oriented book. And then Merritt Tierce is going to be here on Wednesday, and that's one of my favorite books of this year, or maybe the past few years. I think it's so intensely brave and beautifully told again. So that's another one who, I think I will be rereading that book over and over again. But my favorite book of all time, I'll have to say, is Slaughterhouse-Five. That was the first book that I read, and I got to the end, and I was like, I'm going to read it again. I, inhaled it,
Off subject. When you said the characters that spoke to you the most, I was surprised that you didn't mention Alma, because I thought she was just the relationship that you built with her reading the story. Did you burn out on her? Is that why she's not your favorite? Or?
I don't know. There's a lot of people, my editor included, who really love Alma. I think maybe it's because it started for me with Mayor and his voice, and so I've always felt this closeness with him, or this affinity for him. I love Alma too in other ways. No, I don't think I burned out on her. I just, yeah, I don't know. My word was always the one for me for some reason.
I'm thrilled that you mentioned Slaughterhouse-Five. I'm working on a thesis for Kurt Vonnegut currently. But I'm wondering that if there are any mentors or professors here at the university that you remember specifically inspiring or encouraging you as you love to pursue your career.
Yeah. Well, when I was here, I was really fortunate. My first workshop teacher was Sam Chang. And she has been, even after I've gone, somebody who has been encouraging to me in certain ways. And that's been really amazing for me. I mean, like, I think, you know, someone will say something very little that they don't think is a big deal, but to you is a big deal. And I think we've had those moments where maybe she will email me and say something that she thinks is, like, she probably has forgotten, but to me, I've, like, hold on to it and has kind of kept me going sometimes. But the other one really was Chris Offutt, who was here when I was here, and he was the person who pulled me aside sometimes and would talk to me about my work. And, you know, really, like, I had a particularly terrible workshop one time, I remember, where, like, you know, the kind that ends in tears and that kind of thing, and you're in the bathroom and you're never going to be a writer, kind of thing. And he really, like, combated that and was like, basically everyone doesn't know what they're talking about. Forget it. You know, the story is fantastic. I mean, I remember he nominated it for some anthology. Like, he sort of really took interest in my work, which meant a lot to me, too. And even at an undergraduate level, I had teachers who did that. And it makes a huge difference. It really does. Yeah.
So my question pertains to another part of the book.
You guys actually all read it? Some of you read it? It's, like, amazing.
It's kind of like a self-to-text connection for you. Did your parents ever disapprove of you and a guy growing up? Or did his parents ever disapprove of you guys?
No, I don't think so. I never had that experience that Mayor and Maribel have. I mean, that's sort of, I guess some people have said since the book's come out that it's kind of like a Romeo and Juliet retelling, you know? Like, I never really thought of it that way as I was writing it, but I totally see, you know. Oh, really? Yeah. I see that comparison. I think there was a sales rep who told me that the way he was pitching it was like, it's Romeo and Juliet meets House on Mango Street. Okay. You know, so, but no, in my own life, I never had that experience. I had a boyfriend in high school for 4 years, all of high school, and my parents loved him. But, yeah, I don't know.
So you use so many different voices in this book, so I'm just wondering how you, like, got into each character and if you did anything specific to that.
Yeah, it's really a challenge, and I have to say, like, I'm not totally even sure that I pulled it off in every way, but I tried really hard, and originally I had like 20 voices, and someone wisely told me to pare it back. Now there's 11 narrators. I did, there's little technical things that you can do, like the length of somebody's sentences. Like, does someone speak in a run-on kind of way, or does someone speak in a chopped-up kind of way, or do they leave the first word off of sentences instead of saying, like, he just went, do they just say just went, like little things like that you can do to differentiate characters, I think. I wanted some of them to sound sort of more proficient in English than others, or like, there's one who says, my wife had cancer of the breast, like that's not a normal, that tells you something about like where he is, not only with his English, but maybe just in the strata of American society, So I try to put in little things like that, little notes, but I mean, it's hard. But that's one of my favorite things, I think, about writing, is voice, And I think in whatever I do next, you'll see that again, his voice again. Yeah. Is your question?
Oh, sorry. I was wondering if any of the stories your dad might have told you about immigration, from him going to Panama to here, had anything to do with the book, like little quirks or little scenes that you had taken from the stories.
people's stories of actually coming over.
Your dad's?
Yeah, but I mean, like, the ones that end up in the book, you want to know if any of those came from my dad's original story. I don't think so, not really. I mean, my dad's story was that, like, he got into the University of Delaware, and they told him, for some reason, to get on a plane to New York City, which is not that close to Delaware. So he got on with, like, a suitcase and, like, barely any knowledge of English, and flew to New York, and then was, like, stuck in New York and had no idea where to go or what to do. And he, like, spent the night in Penn Station, I think, like, sleeping on the floor. Like, what am I supposed to do? And he finally figured it out and had to take a bus down to Delaware. I mean, it was a whole kind of crazy thing of how he ended up actually getting there. But no, I think this book, more than any book I've written in the past, this was the least autobiographical book that I've written. Like, I thought about my dad's story, and I wanted to honor the spirit of that, you know, just the idea of this, like, ordinary immigrant story. But I didn't really use many of the details from his own journey or anything like that. Although there's other little things, like my dad always wanted a car as a kid, and, like, those cars in there. And my dad gets, like, Auto Week, so he gets the magazine, like, that he was flipping through in that scene. You know, and he's always wanted an Alfa Romeo, so I put that in there, even though it's like a lot of people don't even know. That's not like a very instantly recognizable car make, but I wanted to put that in there just for my dad. There's little things like that of him that are in there, but yeah.
Thinking of the honoring the spirit of the immigrant story, do you have a takeaway, one or multiple, that you would want us to, as readers, to take away about that immigrant story in general?
I think basically that there is no general, you know, there's no generalization, that it's important for us to listen to the individual stories and to get to know them. So the thing with, at one point I had this idea that I would include real voices telling real stories of coming, and then I ended up making them all up. But because I had thought of that at one point, I think they're downstairs, there's this website that I started, unknownamericans.tumblr.com, where I'm asking people to share their actual real stories, and I'm posting them on a just kind of an ongoing basis. You know, I think just to listen, that's the main thing. I mean, the highest compliment I've gotten yet about my book, and a lot of nice people have said a lot of nice things about it, but somebody in Delaware said, someone I didn't know, said she was driving down Kirkwood Highway, which is where the families all live in this building, and that she passed a bus stop, and there were people sitting there who were going to work in the mushroom farms, which is what Arturo does in the book. You know, probably that's where they were going. And she rode by, and she thought to herself, they all have a story. You know, and she looked at them differently than she might have before she read the book. To me, that's like, I mean, what more can you ask for, you know? So.
I'm interested in your thoughts on personal story and cultures of people and the places that they inhabit.
Mm-hmm.
Because while I was listening to the sections you read, and your character's father buying a car sounds to me like a prototypically American thing to do.
Right. Yeah. We got a lot of money, we're going to buy a car. Or a big TV, or, you know, yeah.
And your other individual voice moving from place to place in search of every situation. And so I was just wondering if you had anything to reflect on.
Ooh, I don't know. I mean, I think that's a big topic. I mean, you're just looking for reflections on, like...
I guess, well, to you, how immutable is a sort of like an individual person in the face of like an overarching problem? How far are we moving by society, and where do we
Right. I mean, my instinct, my gut instinct, is that people are largely shaped by their culture. I mean, there's obviously, I think, some, innate, intrinsic qualities that are immutable. There's a passage in the book where the Toros go and see a beach because Mayor's mom is feeling particularly homesick. And they go to a beach in Delaware, and they're standing there looking out, and, Mayor says something like, but one beach isn't every beach, and one home isn't every home. But I think that there's that tension there between, like, the individual and the general, and, the feeling that it was a stand-in for them at that moment in some ways, that beach, like it meant something to them, but the recognition too that they weren't in the place, that they loved, and that it wasn't really the same beach. I think that's a hard thing, and I think that's part of the immigrant experience, though, that tension of, like, being here and wanting to fully be here, but also, like, feeling that tug or that lure of being back at home. And that's something I've definitely seen in my dad firsthand, up close. I mean, to go back to your question, my dad here is one person. When we go to Panama, my dad's a totally different person. He's just more relaxed, he's happier, he has, red cheeks, he's just like, he's a totally different person there. And it's just the environment. It's like the second we land, he changes. And I think you have to say that that's partly culture. Partly it's his connection to the place and stuff like that, but a lot of it is the culture of that place, so.
Well, one character who is sort of present and sort of not present is Mayor's brother.
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about him. I mean, he's an object of envy and something that he wants to emulate. But was he always in that same position, or was he more present in the novel? Did he get taken out? Or
he wasn't even in the novel for a while. And then I just felt like it seemed weird, like, I don't know, both of these Latino families would have just like one kid, like sure, yeah. Somebody brought it up to me, like, is that really realistic? And I was like, oh, maybe Mayor should have a brother. And then he served as an interesting counterpoint to Mayor in many ways, because he's very successful, like he's a soccer player, and his dad, Mayor's dad, wants them both to be soccer players, and Mayor fails miserably at soccer, and then because of that, he becomes this disappointment to his dad, which becomes this storyline throughout the book, and then there's a few other things with Enrique and living up to him as an older brother. So it ended up adding some interesting texture to have him in there, but he wasn't always in there. I mean, I did like 20 drafts of this book, I think, so it's like, I don't know who's come and who's gone, and
And was it difficult to create some, and I don't want to say an enemy to the characters, but you've got Garret and his
there's some antagonizers.
And his people. How does one go about setting up that character without just using a stereotype or just demonizing him?
Yeah, I mean, I think at first he was very flat. So this is a character who comes in and kind of just basically doesn't like that they're there, doesn't like that any immigrants are in what he thinks of as his community. And so he, makes fun of Mayor and is picking on him, and then moves on to picking on Maribel, and becomes sort of this threat throughout the book. And I think for many, many, many drafts, like say there were 20, for the first 15 drafts, he was just a stock, flat character, someone I just had in there so that I could get those scenes of tension. And then I went back and tried to flesh him out and make him a little more like, human, because everybody is, like you have to give him some dimension. Yeah, it's hard.
And of things that you worried about before publication of the book, as far as what people's expectations were or whatever, of you writing an immigrant novel, what has been the reception as far as that goes, compared to what you...
Almost no one has asked me. which I'm fine with. You know, I just had, I don't know why, I had this idea, this kooky idea that people would, you know, like at a reading like this, someone in the back row would stand up and be like, but what do you think about immigration? And what should we do when we have too many immigrants? You know, like there would, I don't know who was going to be in the audience. Who's coming to a book event that's going to be like that? I don't know. But, you know, that hasn't happened, obviously, and thankfully.
Thanks for reading. I'm a teacher of lots of these high school students.
I was going to ask, are you guys in high school? I hope so, because if you look, like I was like, is this what I looked like when I was at the workshop? Because they look so young. You look so young.
They're doing their best.
Yeah. No, you look good. You just look young.
Don't show the guy with the shade.
I'm wondering, you know, a lot of them I think are really incredibly talented writers, and I think it's really hard when you're young to sort of really imagine yourself, to have the identity of like, I am a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if maybe you could talk about that for yourself, like when you decided like, oh, this is a thing that a person could be, and then, and maybe if you had like some encouragement for these guys, like if it's a Saturday afternoon, they're like, well, I could like watch a bad movie, or I could just go like try to write.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll say I'm going to tell this story. You've given me the opportunity to tell this story, which is when I was in high school. Because sometimes people ask me, like, how did I become a writer, you know? And the story of that is that when I was in high school, there was a boy, not my boyfriend, a different boy who I was really in love with, infatuated with. And I would follow him around all the time and tell him how I felt about him. So we would like be at a party and I would like pull him aside and like, I really like you, you know, and then I would call him late at night and be like, I really like you. And eventually he was getting sick of it. He came into school. He came into school one day with a blank journal and he handed it to me and he said, why don't you write down everything you want to say to me for a year and then give it back to me. And because, you know, I would have done anything he asked, I was like, okay, sure. So I took the journal home and I started writing, and I was writing all these entries to him. And then it became a thing where I was like, I just love doing this. Like, I love sitting down at the end of the day and being able to say whatever I want to say. And my mom's not reading this, and nobody cares what language I use. And, you know, it was so freeing to me in a way that I didn't know existed or could exist. So just having that blank journal, but being really diligent about it, because I was writing to him. And then eventually it became something where I was just writing for myself, you know, and the way I always end the story is like, I fell out of love with the boy and I fell in love with writing. And from there, I never really looked back. I knew it was just something that was going to be a part of my life. So I went to college. My dad thought, you'll never get a job writing. So he wanted me to do journalism. Little did he know that no one will get a job doing journalism now either. But I went to Northwestern where they had a good journalism program, but I didn't end up doing that. I thought, well, maybe I'll be a poet. Like, I just didn't know. I just knew writing, something writing related. And I thought maybe I'll be a poet. And I started doing that, and it turned out I was just so bad at poetry. And then I took a fiction class, and I really had this feeling like it just locked into place. It was like, oh, this is what I think I'm supposed to do. And then I did as much as I could while I was there. And while I was there, I had a very wise teacher, Reginald Gibbons, who told me that you only know you're a writer if you do it when no one's waiting for you to write. So I left, and I wrote on my own, even though I was working, you know, it was just like a entry-level job at whatever, it doesn't even matter. But I would come home at night, and I would write, and I would send him stories, my old teacher, and he would write me letters. This was before I had internet connection at home. And I would, like, send it in the mail, and he would send me the story, like, write a little letter back to me, type it up, and send it back. And I applied to graduate schools because I just thought, like, it was just, you know, it was accumulating. It felt like something I really needed to do. And I thought if I didn't do it then I might never do it, and I might regret it. You know, I thought, I'll go on, I'll get married, I'll have kids, and then when will I go back to grad school ever? So I went ahead and applied, and I got in here, thankfully. And it was the first place I heard back from. And as soon as I heard, I was like, there's no question. I mean, you know, who gets into Iowa and doesn't go to Iowa? I don't know. And you know, I feel like they took a chance on me, and I came and I just learned as much as I could, you know. But I worked really hard. The new sign above my desk, which I just tweeted the other day, is don't be lazy, don't waste time. You know, it's like I would set my alarm, I would get up, I would write. You know, I would write until lunchtime, I would stop, I would eat lunch, I would read the other stories for workshop, and, you know, then I would hang out with friends and stuff. But I would put in the time every day. And now I have 2 kids, and that makes it a little harder. But I try still to kind of live by that and do as much as I can when I can. So.
Thank you so much, Cristina.
Thank you, guys.